mainstream media has moved past Trump's first assassination attempt, Joe Rogan still has some questions. Let's listen to him and the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh talking about it.
We've moved on like it never happened.
Like it never happened in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, they stopped talking about it.
It's had no political impact whatsoever.
Nuts.
He got no polling boost from it. Reagan got like 12 points briefly.
Which just shows you the polls are full of shit.
Probably, but
yeah, full of shit.
I mean, they are full of shit. But also, it would not shock me if, because we're so easily distracted, if people really did just forget and don't care a week later, 2 weeks later.
Well, as long as it's not in the news, and it's not in the news, you don't care about it. Also, there was no press conference, so that's kind of crazy. There was no disclosure of all the information about this young man's prior history, what led him to this. They went to his apartment, and it was professionally scrubbed. There was no silverware in his place. There's also this bizarre thing where there's, you know how they get ad data where you can track where phones have been?
Yeah.
This one phone was going from outside of the FBI office in Washington, D.C. to where this kid is multiple times. So how did this kid get these explosive devices? How did he get up on the roof? How did they not flag him? And you see a guy walking around with a rangefinder a half an hour before the event. That guy is going to jail. Like, what are you talking about? There's two reasons for a rangefinder. You're trying to shoot something, or you're using it for golf.
The two also questioned why we still know so little about the gunman, Thomas Crooks. Let's watch.
They were aware that he was there. He somehow or another got on the roof with a rifle. The whole thing sucks. It stinks to high heaven. And then they cremate him. He's gone. They get his body. Someone snatches his body like 5 or 6 days after the event, and 10 days later he's cremated. The whole thing is nuts. Like, who is this kid? Why did he do this? Why did some 20-year-old kid take shots at the president?
Yeah.
Why didn't he have a scope?
This is one where I'm totally open to conspiracy theories, only because there's not even like an official narrative for it. They basically told us nothing. So we're left to fill in the blanks.
So I think the answer, part of the answer to the question of why Trump got no big ratings boost because of it is, well, we do live in different times than the Reagan times. I mean, George W. Bush, after 9/11 happened, his approval rating went from like 50% or whatever it was to 90-something%. And then fast forward to COVID happens, which is probably the other major, like, societal-wide traumatizing event in our lifetimes. Again, there was no bump for Trump. We just live in much more polarized times where people's minds are, I think, not as capable of being changed. We're pretty neatly and evenly split into Republican and Democrats. And I always got to remind people, it used to be so much cross-ticket voting. It used to be, you could be a Republican, but man, that John F. Kennedy looks good on TV. I'm voting for him. Or I'm a Democrat, but I like the manner of how, this, but I'm a Democrat and I'm voting for the Democrat for president, but in my state or in my city, I'm voting for Republicans, I'm in the South, et cetera. Like, that was a dynamic for decades and decades and decades in American politics. Beginning in the aughts, things started to get really neatly sorted into, no, if you're a conservative, you're a Republican, you're voting for the Republican candidate. If you're a liberal or progressive, you're a Democrat and you're supporting the Democratic candidate. And you're doing that at every level. And you're doing that regardless of what world events happenstance. You're not suddenly, I don't like the president, oh, now I like him.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore.
With total partisan blinders on. And I mean, I look at the advent of, when I was a kid, you had so many states that had two senators, one was a Democrat, one was a Republican. And a governorship that would go back and forth. Now, because of, I think, gerrymandering and the fact that we're so tribal, right? So
we're moving. Democrats moved to cities in blue states, and Republicans moved to red states.
Right. We don't see that spillover. And to your point, Robbie, I think it's spot on that what would have been a national uniting event, like an assassination attempt on a former president and the parties, one of the leading parties endorsed candidates. did not have that level of support. Now, and I think part of this too is like our collective psyche. We move on so quickly too. Like
right, to Matt Walsh's point.
Yeah, to Matt's point, that there's very little that affects us.
We got to move on to the next assassination attempt.
God Almighty, and hopefully that's
the last of that. We hope.
But again, I think we as a society move on so quickly with these kind of events. And we see it with hurricanes. We see it with natural disasters now. What was once a uniting issue with everyone pulling together, supporting folks that have been hit hard by whatever condition. We move quickly on from that as well. And I think that's just the nature of, we consume TV so much differently, like we talked about with Mary Melissa. We're all about the 30-second commercial. We're all about the 180-character tweet. And we move on so quickly.
We do. And I think to Joe Rogan and Matt Walsh's point about not exactly knowing everything, or being confused about the shooting. It is the case that I don't think there's been as much probing of the shooter's motivations. Maybe that's just because he's a crazy person and there's not a lot there to get. Obviously, the circumstances of him being able to fire on Trump, hit
close.
Trump, kill someone in the crowd, injure others, in the midst of all this Secret Service protection is just so unfathomable and so dramatic and so unacceptable, and there hasn't been enough accountability for that failure, though the head of the Secret Service did resign, which I think she was absolutely correct to do. But given that people have concerns, and then it happens again. Now, I'm not saying the Secret Service necessarily did a bad job the second time. He was not able to shoot. They fired on him. But again, for all the Democratic complaints that Republican inflammatory rhetoric is causing violence, it's Trump who's now had 2 shooters in 2 months. And this cannot go on. And people are still going to be angry about politics. So whatever steps need to be taken by our government, by our Secret Service to keep our political candidates safe, that needs to happen.
Well, and we're also living in a much different age. I think, after the Reagan assassination attempt in 1981, obviously the Secret Service took a cold, hard look at themselves, right, in terms of presidential protocol with crowds, things like that, secure exits and entrances. And I'm hopeful that coming out of these 2 attempts, that more reform will be in place in terms of the security apparatus, right? The fact that both of these individuals had long-range weapons, right, which is a new, not a recent phenomenon, but a new phenomenon with these assassination attempts, that your perimeter has to be much larger because of the lethal nature of these guns that can shoot at a much more farther distance. And certainly, I think, the former president loves to play golf. That's a really tough thing to secure, right? Think of just golf courses in your own experience, and just in terms of the size of that land. These rallies that both candidates have been massive in terms of the people there. They put up that bulletproof glass for both the vice president and the former president in the wake of that Butler assassination attempt. But we've got to stay vigilant, and it's got to be bipartisan. I'm so pleased to see Democrats equally as enraged as Republicans, especially in Congress, about this attack on the former president, and just how close we got to losing him, literally. And he talked about this at his rally in Long Island. Again, just that the pivot of his head prevented a much more serious situation.
Well, I heard him Trump talking about it on Fox News, maybe it was last night or the night before, with Greg Gutfeld for Gutfeld's show.
Yeah.
And Trump pointed out, I've never really thought about it this way. You think about, the most dangerous professions in America. It's mining, logging, industrial, construction. Blue collar, working class jobs are the really dangerous jobs in America. Not absurdly dangerous. We have protections, we have accommodations, but those are the jobs where people are more likely to die on the job. He pointed out, if you think about it, the job of president. We've had 4 out of 46 have been killed.
High percentage.
Which is, I can't quite do the math on that, but that's like 8-ish%, 7 or 8%,
I think.
I think.
Liberal, science major.
Yeah, I'm doubling it. If it was twice,
liberal arts,
about that.
Yeah.
But no, that's not. That's going back to the. That was just Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy are the 4 who were assassinated, and then a few others died in office but did not were
and also,
killed.
not counting the attempts too,
Right.
on Teddy Roosevelt, on Ronald Reagan, on Jerry Ford a number of times, and now sadly we've added Donald Trump to. And just when we think we're past this, and this is something that we see certainly in other countries as well. Of course, we've had our own trauma with assassins in the past. Just when we think we're past that as a country, the fact that we haven't seen something like this since Reagan in '81 says that we're not fully there in terms of civilization for our country.
We got to be prepared. More Rising right after this.